Tonight, Parliament will be suspended for the next 5 weeks. What will happen to British politics now that our MPs have been unceremoniously evicted from Parliament? Earlier today, the Benn Bill gained royal assent, meaning the government is now legally mandated to ask for an Article 50 extension if they don't secure a deal. Will Johnson ignore the bill and become an outlaw? And presumably, over the next 5 weeks, we will see the beginning of an informal election campaign from Britain's major parties. How is that battle shaping up? What policy proposals can Labour whip out to boost their position in the polls? I'll be discussing all this and more tonight with Aaron Bastani. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Michael. Thanks for joining us in the chamber.
In the chamber. I had to visit the chamber.
Yeah, well,
quickly earlier.
You didn't have the bladderly fortitude of one John Bercow.
Although I have to say, I'm not going to take responsibility for us going late today. I think that was you were conducting a...
That was on me and Gary.
You were conducting business earlier, weren't you?
We did an interview with a chap called David Wallace Wells. He's written a brilliant book called The Uninhabitable Earth. Brilliant book. It's now out in paperback. I would say it's probably the most bracing read I've read on climate change ever. Really, really, really good book. Terrifically written, full of facts, very persuasive. So if you're looking to buy somebody a gift to persuade them about what's going on with climate change, it's out in paperback, like I say. Very, very good. The interview should be out probably next week. Obviously, it all depends on what madness ensues over the next several days in British politics. But that's the plan.
Today, I think this is minor news actually today, but the big thing that happened today that we weren't expecting was that John Bercow, the Speaker, resigned. There's been lots of people gushing at his departure. Are you similarly moved by his moving on?
I think he brought a bit of theatre to the role, right? But in terms of his politics, the whole point of the Speaker is that they're meant to ensure the primacy of the legislature over the government. In his defence, that's what he's done. But that's what he's meant to do. In terms of his personal politics, the idea he's some liberal, John Bercow is silly. He was in the Monday Club when he was younger, hardcore Thatcherite, etc. There's a reason why the Tories were very happy for him to become the Speaker of the House. As he's gotten older, the claim is that his wife, Sally Bercow, sort of made him go a bit further left. But I think he's played a pretty important role in the country's history as Speaker. You could envisage a different Speaker with a different set of priorities, meaning that this whole thing plays out quite differently.
He basically did do a lot to block Brexit, right?
Yeah.
So he allowed those amendments, which meant that Theresa May had to ask for an extension. That's why we're in an extended period now.
Yeah.
I don't know much about his wife, but I know that Guido Fawkes hates her. So Guido was tweeting today, basically when we met John Bercow in university, he used to be a twat then, and now his wife's a twat now, and it was all a bit like, whoa.
Oh, it's typical class from Paul Staines.
Yeah.
Drink driving Paul.
It's funny, isn't it, that you get demonised and there's people so much more rude than you on Twitter.
Do I get demonised? I've blocked most of these people by now.
Maybe you did.
Do I get am I demonised more than Guido Fawkes?
By angry centrist people, yeah.
But that's because that's because they've become completely detached from reality. They have to blame somebody, right? They don't understand that the political events of the last several years are a response to a crisis of capitalism since 2008. They can't have a structural understanding of history. There have to be good people and there have to be bad people. They're the good people, I'm the bad person. That's not how it works. That's why they'll keep on losing.
So the bigger story with Bercow, I think his politics are somewhat irrelevant in terms of his resigning as Speaker. I think the issue more is that you've got the Labour Party and Remainers who are really celebrating, I suppose, the power of Parliament, and the Tories on the other side who are basically walking out while he's giving his leaving speech, suggesting that he has, intervened in the people's will to block Brexit. And I don't know if you're worried that maybe Labour are getting a little bit carried away with this whole veneration of the role of MPs in holding the government to account, as opposed to the population at large.
The public don't give a toss about this stuff. Let's be real. And yes, John Bercow has helped Parliament retain the ascendancy over the executive, but the executive, in so much as, the government, in so much as it was looking to deliver on the will of the people expressed in that referendum, I think most people would agree with that. There was a tweet this morning from Susanna Reid, does Good Morning Britain, and she said, look, I voted Remain, but people are ashamed that politicians haven't been able to, maybe get the tweet up, we haven't shown it to Gary, it just popped in my head. But the fact we can't get a deal through is an indictment on our political class. That's how most people see it.
Slightly more scientific than Susanna Reid.
Well, it's scientific. It's just not particularly. It's not good science. It's anecdotal evidence is valid in terms of generating hypotheses. Anecdotes are perfectly fine. Is it conclusive evidence? Of course, it's not.
Well, is my YouGov poll in front of me conclusive evidence? We can discuss.
But it's more conclusive than.
Can we get this
an
one
anecdote
Gary?
For sure?
Also, Gary, I can't see what's on the screen in here. I don't know if we can address that during the show or if that's just how we're going to live with it today. Brilliant, it is up there. What a legend. Okay, so amongst the general population, 30% of the public think Boris Johnson and the government are more in touch with the public when it comes to Brexit. 19% of the public think that Parliament is more in touch with the public, and 40% say neither of them. I kind of relate to the 40%, I suppose. But Remain voters, and this is, I think, where it's quite important for Labour's strategy, 37% of those think that MPs in Parliament are more attuned to the public on Brexit than the government. And as that seems to be at this point in time Labour's target demographic, that might be why they see it as sensible to identify so strongly with the MPs over the government and give these huge standing ovations to John Bercow.
I don't think that polling means anything.
Why?
Mean anything. But, okay, let's go to how many respondents did they ask? 10,000?
1,676.
Okay. Go to 1,600 people and ask them what Parliament is. You'll probably get a couple of hundred different answers. I mean, the category. This is why polling around general elections generally is reliable. Everybody's voted. Everyone knows who the parties are. There's years of baseline data. We can refine samples. We know what kind of groups are more likely to turn out, etc. It's not bulletproof, but it's worth polling. This kind of day-to-day, when you talk about new variables and concepts and ideas and possibilities people have never talked about before, when you poll for it, it's very weak data. I mean, that's probably correct, but I'm just saying establishing a whole political stratagem on it, I think, is a bit short-sighted.
The screen's gone again, Gary. It's gone back to just whatever the desktop is. Brilliant, back again. One last bit of sort of last-minute news before we move on to whether Boris Johnson is going to break the law. So there was a motion in the last hour past, it was written by Dominic Grieve, that demands that key advisors to Boris Johnson make public all communications about prorogation and Operation Yellowhammer, be they made on WhatsApp, be they made on Signal, Telegram, private email accounts, both encrypted and unencrypted, text messaging and iMessaging. It lists all the different forms of communication that Boris Johnson's advisors will have spoken to each other about prorogation and Operation Yellowhammer, which was that report about how the government is preparing for no deal. They're supposed to reveal these documents to the Parliament, I suppose, on the 11th of September on order of the Queen. Is this significant?
I don't think so. What they should do, well, we don't know until we see what the content of what they've written is. Generally speaking, people are far less inhibited when it comes to private communications than public communications. That's a good rule of thumb. So could some people resign? Could it, fuck up a few careers? Probably. Will it change the course of Brexit? I don't know.
Well, I mean, they
probably not. But it could do, right? We just don't know. But
my limited understanding of the law, in terms of me Googling it 5 minutes before we went live, suggests that actually the government is probably just not going to comply to this because the courts can't intervene. It's not written into law. It's written into, I suppose, it's now become, it was a Commons procedural motion as opposed to statute.
Right.
So the courts can't enter into it.
It's not like News International's hard drives, right?
The Parliament could kick up a stink, but they're being prorogued from today anyway. So it seems like, I don't know, maybe a publicity stunt. I don't quite get it.
Look, we don't have a constitution. None of this stuff matters.
Okay, so that one the courts can't intervene in. What the courts can intervene in is the Ben Bill, which demands that Boris Johnson seeks an extension from the European Union. This became ever since it was passed, this has become an issue of controversy in British politics because Boris Johnson seems to be refusing or saying that he will refuse to comply with this law, whilst also saying that he's not going to break the law. It's created a bit of a puzzle in British politics. And this was, I mean, credit to him, really skewered Sajid Javid on this topic yesterday on the Andrew Marr show. So I want to show that clip before we talk about whether and how Boris Johnson is going to break the law.
Well, this government, of course, it will obey the law. The Prime Minister's been very clear about that. He was asked about that in Parliament last week, and he was very clear. So we will obey all laws.
If the law says the Prime Minister must ask for an extension beyond October the 31st to Brussels, the Prime Minister will do that, because that's what the law says.
The Prime Minister will go to the October Council meeting on October the 17th and 18th, and he will try to strike a deal. He absolutely will not ask for an extension in that meeting.
If the law says that he must ask for an extension, what are his options?
Well, the law talks about October the 19th in case there is no deal agreed in that council meeting. Should we get to that position, we will look at our options. Of course, we'll obey the law.
After that council, the Prime Minister would ask for an extension, because that is the law of this country.
We will not change our policy. Our policy is clear.
How does this work? It's completely baffling.
Well, we have to wait and see.
If the law says one thing, and you're saying the government's going to obey the law, but we're not going to do that one thing, it's very hard to see how you get out of that.
The government will not change its policy, and we will be consistent with obeying the law, but also sticking to our policy, and you'll have to wait and see how that happens. There's a lot of days between now and October the 19th.
The government's position is that we will obey the law, but we won't do what the law tells us to do.
The Prime Minister will go to the council meeting on the 17th and 18th. He'll be trying to strike a deal. He absolutely will not be asking for an extension in that meeting. Should we, as the bill talks about the 19th being an important date,
yes,
and at that point we will consider our options, but our policy is clear, it is unchanged. We will be leaving on October the 31st.
At that council, if you don't get a deal and the 19th comes round, as dates tend to do, you at that point will obey the law or not?
We will obey all laws, because all governments should obey laws, absolutely. But you'll have to wait and see what happens then.
It can't be true that you're going to obey the law, but you're not going to do what the law says, and the Prime Minister is not going to resign. I just don't see how you get out of this. I really don't. Just tell us a little bit. If you've got a cunning plan, or if Dominic Cummings has got a cunning plan, this is the moment to tell us, because I don't believe you have.
We have a plan, which is to stick to what we've been doing day in, day out since the 6 weeks ago that we came into office, which is to plan properly for no deal in case it happens, but to put a tremendous amount of effort, all the effort we can, in getting a deal.
Solid performance from Andrew Marr there. I like the will you just tell us a little bit line. But you've got an obvious problem, right? So the government is mandated to ask for an extension. This is by law, that if they haven't agreed a deal by the 19th of October, they have to send a letter and seek an extension from the European Union. The government is also saying, we will not do this. And the only way that it seems like you could simply square that circle is by Boris Johnson resigning. They've also said that's not going to happen. So it seems very difficult how you're going to get out of this mess. There was, though, a madcap plan that was briefed yesterday to the Daily Telegraph. So we can look through this to see if you think this is a reasonable option or a genius way out. So we can get up probably this Telegraph story now. So I'm going to quote the story. The Prime Minister's key advisers held a meeting on Sunday to thrash out a strategy to scupper Parliament's efforts to force a 3-month Brexit extension if no new deal is agreed. One plan under serious consideration would see the Prime Minister send an accompanying letter alongside the request to extend Article 50, setting out that the government does not want any delay after October 31st. On Sunday night, a cabinet source told the Telegraph there is no prescribed letter that has to be sent. No, there is a prescribed letter that has to be sent. Does that stop the Prime Minister sending other documents to the EU? I don't think it does. A political explainer, perhaps, as to where the government's policy is. It has to make clear that the government is asking for an extension, but let's not forget what the next step is. Once that is done, the Europeans are going to ask, why? What is the reason? What if the government said, we don't have any reasons for an extension? So the idea here is that Boris Johnson will send the prescribed letter, which Parliament has said he must send to the EU, and then send another letter that says, actually, guys, I don't really want it. Can you please refuse it to me? Or if you give me this extension, all we're going to do is waste more time, so it would be pointless. Please don't give it to us. So that was their madcap plan. Kind of desperate stuff, isn't it?
It is desperate. I mean, the only thing that's propping them up right now is the British media. So, other than that, they haven't really got many cards to play. But it's a good thing that Sajid Javid sold CDOs like a criminal financier rather than entering law, because legally speaking, he makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever. It's a good thing he was a gangster working in the City of London for Deutsche Bank before the global financial crisis.
It turns out also sending that second letter wouldn't be legal. So because the word of the law isn't just you have to send the letter. The word of the law is that you have to, let me find it, you must seek to obtain an extension. So if you do something which is suggesting that you're encouraging the EU to not give you it, then obviously you've broken the law. So everyone, ex-Supreme judges have been all over the radio saying that this is ridiculous and that this is not an option. So we're still none the wiser as to what is going to happen.
And nothing's going to happen, right? Looks like
Well, something has to happen. What's going to happen? You've got these three. I mean, I'm not going to grill you as if you're a Tory cabinet member, but you can guess, right? So you've got these options, which is that either Boris Johnson is going to ask for an extension, or he's going to resign, or he's going to get a deal. That is an option, or he's going to break the law. Which are you going for?
The deal or breaking the law.
Oh, interesting. I'd love to see him go to prison.
Would he go to prison?
Yeah, I think the
First time offender, previously good character. I'm sure he can get good character
I
references.
think the argument is that if he doesn't do this, well, I think more it's that if he doesn't do this, then someone from the civil service sends over the letter. But he will have committed a crime at that point, I think. So you could.
Can you imagine, like, is there going to be Jeremy Corbyn, like, demos during the next general election, like, lock him up, him up? I mean, why not? In this instance, he actually would have broken the law. So.
Well, he might already have been locked up. That's the
I
ideal.
mean, Una and Sam, they obviously did a great podcast with us about prison abolition. You know, Una and Sam, what's your position on locking up Boris Johnson? I mean, surely, you know, a short, sharp shock would help Boris Johnson. That would make him buck his ideas up. Send him to HMP Wandsworth for a few weeks.
You think he'd
a wrap around the knuckles?
You think he'd do all right in there? Do you think his charm would?
No, it wouldn't last fucking
work
10 minutes.
Wonders as it does on Have I Got News for You?
I actually think a lot of people would just sort of be befuddled and sort of just, who is this guy? Never met anybody like this before. How the hell did he become the Prime Minister? He's absolutely useless. Can't do his own shoelaces up.
All right, we said one option. So one option as opposed to Boris Johnson resigning or breaking the law is he gets a deal. He was in Ireland today talking to Leo Varadkar, the president. Is it the president? The Taoiseach. Taoiseach.
Yeah.
I should have worked out how to pronounce that before we went live. About a potential deal, how we can get rid of the backstop. And he kind of got bodied, actually, by Leo Varadkar. So we're going to watch that video now, if we can get that up. And I know you have some thoughts about whether or not a clean Brexit is coherent as something to aim for.
In my view, the story of Brexit won't end if the United Kingdom ends the European Union on the 31st of October or even the 31st of January. There's no such thing as a clean break or just getting it done. Rather, we'll just move on to a new phase. If there is no deal, it'll cause severe disruption for British and Irish people alike, not so much on the continent. And whatever happens, we'll have to get back to the negotiating table quite quickly. And when we do, the first items on the agenda will be citizens' rights, the financial settlement, and the Irish border. All issues which we had resolved in the withdrawal agreement made with your predecessor, an agreement made in good faith by 28 governments. But if there is a deal, and I think it's possible, we'll enter talks on a future relationship agreement between the EU and the UK. It's going to be very tough. We'll have to deal with issues like tariffs, fishing rights, product standards, state aid, and it will then have to be ratified by 31 parliaments. Prime Minister, negotiating FTAs with the EU and the US and securing their ratification in less than 3 years, I think is going to be a Herculean task for you. But we do want to be your friend and your ally, your Athena in doing so. And I think the manner in which you leave the European Union will determine whether that's possible.
Yeah.
So this idea of, I mean, the Tories are obviously trying to win the next general election on the argument that they are the only people who can end this Brexit mess, get it done, and deliver what they call a clean Brexit. They prefer it to a hard Brexit. I suppose all the Remainers call it. They call it a crash-out Brexit. Everyone's trying to frame this.
No-deal Brexit, hard Brexit.
No, but the Remainers now call it crash-out Brexit because they don't think that no-deal Brexit is evocative enough.
Right.
Because the idea is that it's not an absence of something, it's the presence.
I mean, no-deal Brexit isn't actually Brexit. That's the point, this idea of like this messianic moment. It's all resolved, total catharsis, unless we either remain, which obviously will piss off a lot of people, or we have a deal, which, you know, establishes a trading relationship with the EU, etc., something like Norway Plus. That's quite cathartic. No deal is not cathartic. It's not Brexit because that we then, like Leo Varadkar says, we have to then negotiate the next the next 10, 20 years, really. What kind of relationship do we have with the European Union? Legal,
Well, I mean, what he's
where does
saying is that
ECJ fit in? What's his name? Ian Holloway, football coach, doesn't want us to be a member of UEFA. But I'm where does Brexit end for these people? So, I mean, again, this is one of the internal contradictions of the Brexit movement. So there is no clean Brexit because they have an understanding of sovereignty which doesn't exist in the 21st century.
What are they thinking, though, then? So if you've got people in the Tory right who want this clean Brexit, what are they just deluded, or do they have a sort of a separate secret plan as to what is going to happen if we crash out of the EU? Well, it doesn't seem like we can on the 31st of October, but let's say they do find a weird legal loophole that means that Boris Johnson can stay Prime Minister and we crash out on the 1st of November. If you're saying that's not even Brexit, that's where all the rows start. What are they hoping for? What's the best case scenario if you're Jacob Rees-Mogg?
Keeping their seats. That's all this is about, keeping their seats. There is no vision for a no-deal Brexit. There is no vision for a no-deal Brexit.
The one thing it would allow you to do...
Trade deal with the US. That's about it,
right? So the one thing it would allow you to do is instantly move into the trading orbit of the United States. Basically, probably on really shit terms, but they don't really mind because the shit terms would involve
Boris Johnson
it being more easy to exploit.
Boris Johnson thinks that free trade means we can sell our beef to the US, but the US doesn't sell its beef to us.
What's that?
Did you not see this?
I didn't see that video actually. I saw it on Twitter, but I never bothered.
He was
to
basically,
play. Said enough of him.
Whippity wobbity flippity floppity. We can sell our beef to the United States. Brilliant beef. There's not 1 ounce of British beef in America. I think it's still because of mad cow disease actually. But then he was like, and we wouldn't sell their beef here. And you're like, well, free trade works both ways. That's the point. So the idea that we could protect the domestic market from American beef, but sell ours over there without any tariffs, is not free trade, and it wouldn't happen. Again, like they think it's the mid-19th century, they think this is the British Empire, and it's that vision of Britain as a free trade power bestriding the world like a colossus. It dovetails very neatly with what we call neoliberalism in one nation. So you can have free trade, but we live in a world of borders, of tariffs, and so their view is we basically export all our stuff and there's no tariffs on it. But in terms of importing stuff, of course, we'd have tariffs on it. This isn't how it works. So I don't think there's anything more to it than simply there's an affective, emotional movement behind it. There has been for 25 years. Euroscepticism goes back a long way. Some of it's justified, some of it isn't. But I think now it's become about nothing more than them just keeping their seats in power. Boris Johnson has adopted this position to become Prime Minister. That's what's happened. There is no vision about what actually transpires with the Brexit process. There's none.
What about Nigel Farage? He's not going to get a seat out of this. Do you think he's just doing it for fame?
Yeah. He wants to be like he wanted to be the ambassador to the United States after 2016. I mean, he wants something like that. He'd love to be a diplomat or something. Yes, he'd love that. They have no vision for what Brexit actually means, which is why, although I think there's a lot that the left should be very worried about with the general election. A lot. I don't think we'd necessarily win a majority. I think we could be the biggest party, in hung parliament, because we're doing so badly in Wales and Scotland. Frankly, that's what it boils down to. The margins.
So are the Conservatives, though. That's the...
No, they are, but I'm saying in terms
the
of,
upshot
for Labour to win a majority, they'd have to win seats in Scotland. You can't not win seats in Scotland and suddenly win a majority. Even if they did outstandingly well in England, being very optimistic, it'd be very hard to do that. One of the good things about a general election, even though there's much to fear for the left, is that you could have that conversation. What do you want? What do you want? And, that's a question that hasn't really been posed to Brexiteers by the media for 15 years. 15 years, and it's all coming very late in the day.
Well, I mean, they have the democracy line, right? So it's a perfect get out. You say, what do you want? And they say, we want to implement the people's will. So it is, I mean, you can push harder and say, the people's will would also be implemented if we stay in the orbit of the EU's trading nation. But what do you want in that USA free trade deal?
I'll give you an example. Right? There was on a Facebook page, a local politics Facebook page, and a guy who's pro-Brexit said that every trade deal we have with a foreign country should be put to a referendum. Which that would be that fits with that vision, like you say, of sort of radical sovereignty and democracy. Do people really want a referendum for every single trade deal we negotiate? Oh, we're now going to allow visa-free travel for Turkey to come to the UK. Do we have a referendum for that? Oh, we're now going to have some kind of passporting arrangement in terms of financial services with Malta. Do you have a referendum for that? Where does it end? So I think basically this whole political event or set of events has unpicked a notion or idea of politics which doesn't really exist. We have representative democracy because the idea of pure direct democracy for absolutely everything clearly isn't. You can't do it. It's not plausible. And that to me seems like the end game for this idea of sovereignty and pure democracy. And Farage was very big on that, actually. UKIP, before the Brexit referendum in 2015 in their manifesto, they were talking about referenda for everything. Direct democracy.
I think you might be underplaying the extent to which there are interests at play in which there is a coherent political project. In terms of, so I think
there are
if
some
you say
interests,
what's the
do you think there is? What you think this is driven? This is driven by material interests.
I think there's some weirder segments of capital who think that they could benefit of this, but it's very marginal. I think it's more a political project, which is that if you want to be part of, for Farage, it is partly that he wants to be the British ambassador to the United States.
He must be famous.
But it is also, it's an anti-migrant movement as well, right? So if the Lexit idea whereby we can be an independent country that doesn't have any harmonisation with different countries' trading standards, I think is kind of implausible. So either we're going to be in the trading orbit of the EU or we're going to be in the trading orbit of the US. Why Farage, and I suppose why some people who voted Brexit want to be in the trading orbit of the US, is because then you can have free trade without immigrants.
Really?
Well, if you
tell that to the US, they're pissed off with NAFTA. Go tell that to them. They don't seem to think that NAFTA a free trade bloc worked particularly well for them.
No, but that's because their free trade bloc. Well, that's not why they have lots of migration.
For a Trump supporter, the two things are coterminous. We know that, but there's resistance. There's hostility to Mexican immigration in the United States, and they see it as part and parcel of being a member of NAFTA.
No, but
the idea that you would placate anti-immigrant sentiment by being part of a free trade.
No, you wouldn't placate. The point is, you have freedom of movement with the EU, and you wouldn't have freedom of movement with the US. I don't think that would be a particularly big demand of the United States.
Well, I don't know. Would you? You'd have to have a certain visa arrangement for US nationals, and you would.
Probably. Well,
you would.
Yeah, but you wouldn't get.
You can't have total free movement of capital, and then you have the exact same visa regime we have right now for workers. You'd have to have something.
I don't know if that's true. I think with NAFTA it probably is like that. I think with NAFTA you have free trades of goods and services, but not free movement of people.
No, Mexico.
That was very specific to the EU.
Mexico, United States. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying we'd have visa-free travel with the United States. Clearly. But if we're going to become increasingly integrated with their economy, labour markets would also be very likely to become increasingly integrated. That's not passport, we don't need to see a passport. It would mean if you want a 3-month work visa in the UK from the US, it's a lot easier to get once we've entered some kind of trade agreement than it presently is. The two go hand in hand, generally, which is what happened with NAFTA. They made it a lot easier for workers to work across borders. They did.
Did they?
Yes. It's not like the EU, you're absolutely right. But it did come sort of hand in hand with a relaxed sort of legal framework around temporary economic migration. It's been really, really tightened up in the last few years.
Should we move on to the general election campaign?
Go on.
Because it's probably, although I suppose this is a question as well, do you think the general election campaign could be won or lost on the politicisation of trade? Do you think people who voted Brexit over the next 2 months, which is going to be the election period, I suppose, can be persuaded that actually the project they've bought into is just going to be this, in Labour's terms, Trump deal Brexit or bargain basement project?
That's our
best bet. That's got legs?
That's our best bet, isn't it? I still think many people won't be persuaded, but if you can pull off 10% of them, maybe. Anti-American sentiment goes very deep, right, in this country.
Yeah, I think so. I'm into that, especially when Donald Trump is president.
Yeah, and it's also it's something which would cut across both Leave and Remain votes, I think.
The other thing we need to do, though, is have our headline announcements on the economy. So one thing I get worried about watching, it's reasonable. We're in a moment of parliamentary chaos, so it's fine to get bogged down in that momentarily. But what everyone in the Labour movement, everyone in the Labour Party, every MP should be doing constantly is having a clear answer on the parliamentary shenanigans, whatever, and then pivoting straight to Labour's economic vision, Labour's transformative vision, because that's what you're going to win the people who we need to win over to win a general election. It's not really calling Boris Johnson a liar.
Nobody cares if he's a liar. They think all politicians are liars.
Some people care. It's the they is specific here, right? So you've got some sort of like liberal Remainy types who actually have quite a lot of faith in the political system, and I think they love it when Emily Thornberry calls Boris Johnson a liar, and they love it when they give a standing ovation to Bercow, and they like the whole defence of parliamentary procedure. Then you've got, less propertied. That is quite a specific section of liberal society.
Let's look at it historically. Moral critique of politicians is not successful. George W. Bush, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, second term, people didn't think really upstanding, good, moral person. Jimmy Carter, people said he's a good guy, he's not fit to be president. Gordon Brown, who's a very smart guy, great chancellor, awful prime minister. So the idea that, you can win an election because the opponent is morally bad, I just don't, it doesn't, there's not many empirical examples of it working.
Did you see conversations and you see how do they respond, what seems to be most effective? And their argument was, don't call him racist. Don't...
Guys, stop. The show's stopped.
Oh.
What's going on?
Oh, we're back. Are we?
You're back.
Oh.
What happened there?
We are back.
Wirecast version. Also, we need a more powerful computer.
Is this
Gary, go on.
prompt to say you are watching Tisky Sour, you're watching Novara Media? As you know, this is only... Have we gone out again? No, we're back. This is only possible because of your kind support. If you are already a subscriber, thank you very much. If not, please go to support.novaramedia.com. As you know, our ask is for the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. Keep your comments coming. We will go to your questions at the end. Please like this video. It means it appears in more people's feeds. Share it on Facebook. Share it on Twitter. We lost about 300 viewers in that technical glitch. So, if you have any contact with them, tell them that we're back again.
That's the second time in a week, isn't it? Well, it happened at the end of last week, right?
Anyway.
We need to sort this out because we're going to be doing live shows every night. We need you to go to support.novaramedia.com to help us build a new media for different politics.
Max Shanley saying GCHQ took down the stream.
If only.
Anyway, I don't know where did it cut
More
out?
critique. You were saying Donald Trump. Actually, the polls say
it's not the polls. This was in focus groups. It was saying don't call him racist. Don't call him stupid. Don't, I suppose, bang on about the fact that he's rich or that he cut taxes. Talk about that he spends too much time on Twitter. So in these focus groups, I mean, obviously I saw this in the context of a bunch of leftists saying the Democratic establishment have no idea this is a stupid line to go into the election on. But they'd found that in their little focus groups, it was effective when they said that, Obama tweeted on average once a day and Donald Trump tweets on average.
And play golf.
And eat chicken. And watch Fox News.
But people can relate to that, right?
Have we gone again? We're back again.
We're fine.
Oh,
what you keep on saying we're fine.
No, it's because I just need to stop looking at my screen because there's a delay on my screen, so I don't know when we've gone or come back. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change.
Well, look, even if we go,
change the window.
Even if we go, we'll come back.
Yeah. Okay. How do we get the conversation back to economic inequality, Aaron?
I think we pivot that was a great Bernie Sanders video which you recently shared, and somebody asked Sanders about is Donald Trump a liar or something, right? Literally that sort of question.
Someone asked him if who's the House leader of the Democrats?
Pelosi. Someone
asked him. So it was at the point where there was a very, I suppose, Washington debate between AOC, the Squad, and Nancy Pelosi, where AOC had implied in a tweet that potentially the reason Pelosi was targeting them was because they were women of color, and then that created a sort of very online debate, basically, about whether Pelosi was a racist. Bernie Sanders is asked about it, and he sort of says, well, I mean, so this is a Beltway story. Of course, Nancy Pelosi's not racist. AOC is also great. But let's talk about the fact that in the United States, free people have more wealth than 50% of society. Let's talk about it in the United States. In the last 40 years, workers' wages have declined, I think. Well, the top 1% have increased by X trillion amount. Yeah. So it's this idea that you give a simple answer and you pivot straight away. How did Labour do it?
Well, he was going. This is inside.
Yeah.
He was almost going to say inside baseball, but he's like, he didn't want to say that because it's that's what somebody who is inside baseball would say, and that's absolutely right. Basically, don't even answer the questions the media sets.
No, you do have to answer them. You have to answer them quickly and simply.
No, of course. But like you say, the key takeaway is the majority of the time you spend talking should be about positive propositional things on a terrain where you do better with the general public than your opponent. That's what it should be. And that's what he's very good at. That's what he's outstanding at. And Labour right now aren't that good at it. Emily Thornberry on BBC Question Time last week was probably an example of that. She tried to talk about the food banks, and then Fiona Bruce said, we know about all the food banks. Of course, Fiona Bruce lives in a multi-million-pound London property and £300,000 a year. We're now at a point where this is the problem, because there's too many people in the Labour Party who are insiders and who know these people. She should have said to Fiona Bruce, "Excuse me, Fiona, you live in a £2.5 million house. You earn several £100,000 a year. You have no right to say food banks don't matter." That's what Bernie Sanders would have done. And I think, sadly, there's not enough people in the Parliamentary Labour Party willing to rock the boat, willing to say to people in the media, you were a part of the establishment. You propped up people who have underpinned falling living standards in this country for a decade. You were complicit. Don't you dare tell me that doesn't matter. That's what we need. Bernie Sanders has the backbone to do that. The question is how many politicians on the Labour side do as well.
I mean, it's a difficult skill, because I mean, the thing, Corbyn has the backbone to do it, but even he struggles. I mean, McDonnell can do it successfully, but I think it's a real rare talent actually to be able to pivot like that. Let's move on to, will McDonnell expropriate your landlord? So in terms of pushing the debate to the many against the few, a lot of this will be, in practical terms, drawing on the existing 2017 manifesto that was incredibly popular. I'm sure we'll see, free tuition fees, coming back to the centre of debate, a living wage for everyone. I mean, we remember the policies, but there have been a few which have been sort of launched since then. So one of them is the Inclusive Ownership Fund that we've talked about on the show before. But the most recent one is John McDonnell's proposals to have a right to buy for private tenants. So at the moment, you have a right to buy for people who live in council properties. They get, if you've lived there a certain amount, you can buy your home at a discounted rate. McDonnell is suggesting that this should apply also to people who have private landlords. So we're going to talk about this in a moment. But first of all, we're going to watch again another clip from Andrew Marr, this time him grilling McDonnell on the practicalities of this proposal.
The proposals. It's not one that I favour, but what we did say, if you remember, that for those people earning over those people earning over £1 million, we'd expect their income tax returns to be public, just like mine are.
Over £1 million.
Yeah.
You've also said that I think 2.5 million people who, instead of putting money into pensions, have invested in a property, buy to let.
Yeah.
And those properties under a Labour government would be sold to the tenants. And the question is, at what price?
Right. We're exploring the idea of a right to buy for private tenants,
yes.
Which is there available to council tenants and others. And then the discussion would be about what would be a fair price. And if you remember, in the past, there's been fair rent assessments in this country. So some people have put forward the idea you could have a fair price assessment, but that's part of the consultations that we'll be having.
So the question is, would it be the price that the person had originally bought the property at?
So, I wouldn't expect anyone to lose out, of course.
So they wouldn't lose
no,
out.
I think people
would be a fair market price.
Of course it would. People would be protected, of course. You wouldn't want to... if people have invested in that way, you'd want them protected. But this is giving people who have rented over a period of years the opportunity to purchase if they could, because it gives their family stability.
That makes it very clear. John McDonnell, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Now then.
So this is now being presented... I should have got some headlines, actually, but you can imagine how this is being presented by the Telegraph and the Times as sort of a grab of private property. Not only are they attempting to take 10% of large businesses for the workers, which I think the right wing are all calling expropriation instead of just the fact that the workers should be able to own a little bit of the business whose wealth they create. But what's interesting about this proposal is it was actually originated in a centre-right think tank. It's not a leftist policy. So it originated in the think tank Civitas, who are aligned to the Tory party, and the idea was they wanted to revive the vision of property owning democracy that was a central plank of Margaret Thatcher's electoral appeal. So she had a vision that the best way to create basically right-wing people was to get them to own their homes. And she thought that because too many people lived in council homes, they would vote Labour. She wanted them to buy those council homes, then they'd suddenly have a stake in the capitalist system. They'd be asset owners with an interest in asset price inflation. This is a problem for the Conservatives, so they wanted to create a way whereby you can get people onto the property ladder. In a quirk of history, this is now being proposed from the left and being attacked from the right. In terms of what this practically looks like, I did have a look at the original report, but it's a bit too long for this show. So there's a really good summary on the Shelter website, so we can get up this quote, actually. You can just zoom in on the notes if you want, because I didn't put a link. So this This is from Shelter. In essence, Civitas's proposal is much the same as the existing right to buy for social tenants, with two important modifications. As in the social sector, after 3 years in a home, the renter would be able to buy it at a discount of 35%, up to a cap of 77,900 outside London and 103,900 in London. This would require longer minimum tenancies than the current 6 or 12 months. So Saunders, who's the guy at Civitas, backs Shelter's calls for 5-year tenancies. The two modifications are that the discount would never be allowed to mean the landlord actually lost money. In effect, this would limit the discount to the amount that house prices had gone up since the landlord bought the home, or 35% of the cap, whichever was lower. And secondly, new build properties would be excluded from right to buy for 25 years to avoid discouraging landlord investment in new developments. So owners would be partially compensated. So obviously they're not allowed to lose money because the discount is limited to the amount that they originally brought the property for, but they are going to lose some in terms of, you know, the opportunity cost, what they would have got for it on the market, and that will be in part compensated by cuts to capital gains tax. In a way, this seems smart. It's the Labour Party trying to appeal to, I suppose, aspirational people who want to become homeowners, saying we're not the party just of state dependency, we're the party of independent people who own their property.
Or anybody who rents. People are tired of paying. People are tired of paying loads of money to landlords for sitting on their asses doing nothing.
Do you think it's telling, though, that this came from a centre-right think tank? Because did the Labour Party, one of the main reasons that the Labour... I mean, I think in a way it's a great policy. I mean, I'm a renter and I would... Well, one, I'd love to have a 5-year tenancy, but other than that, I'd love to be able to buy a property. But there is a danger potentially where, you know, Margaret Thatcher wanted to create property owners because she thought they would be more likely to vote Tory. Now McDonnell wants to create property owners. Why this time are they not going to be more likely to vote Tory? One of the big reasons why Labour is doing so well in the cities isn't just because of Brexit. It's because there's a whole generation of people who are private renters who are, you know, pissed off at capitalism at this point.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a risk?
No, I don't think it's a risk. There's a great example I talk about in an article I recently wrote at luxurycommunism.com. Check that out. Golden Lane Estate, very near the Barbican, was built in 1952 for working class Londoners. Had swimming pools, tennis court, nursery for kids. And today, if you want to rent a room in Golden Lane Estate, rent a room in a former council estate, we have all these people who hate Jeremy Corbyn. They say, well, I'm working class. I was raised on a council estate. Yeah, guess what? On this council estate in London, it's £950 a month to rent a room. One room. So when we had that kind of property being sold off with right to buy, what was going on was basically a form of expropriation from what we all publicly owned, what we all owned in common. That was expropriated, right? And it was given to individuals. It was privatised. They, as Conservatives, had no problem with that. What we're talking about here is the infringement of private property rights from certain elite interests to less powerful people. They have a problem with that. So they have no problem with expropriation. They'll also, the left takes property away from people. They do the exact same thing. It's just they do it in order to serve specific interests and to uphold certain political principles. In this instance, it very much does infringe private possession of property in a way that right to buy under Thatcher in the 1980s didn't, because it was common property that was being taken away. So it's both consistent and inconsistent. I can see why they hate it, but at the same time, it's a very smart move by Labour because it's very much a continuation of the kinds of policies and the kinds of rhetoric you saw in the 1980s. Not just right to buy, with the privatisation, James Medway talked about this last week, with the privatisation of British Rail, that's a bit later, British Steel, British Airways in the 1980s. The Tories were saying, oh, workers can now go and buy shares in these companies. That's precisely what John McDonnell is talking about with the Worker Ownership Fund. But with Thatcher, it was like, well, they can if they want to, whereas now it's being done in a very organised way where you're saying, well, the workers that create this value will also enjoy some of the fruits from that labour by owning equity in the companies they work for. It's both a continuation of Thatcherism, but also a break with it. So very clever politics.
I mean,
Very
key
clever.
is also that it should reduce house prices a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to remember that even though it's proposed by a centre-right think tank, it was not adopted by the Conservative Party, and probably the reason it was not adopted by the Conservative Party is because it's likely to reduce house prices, because by making more houses available for purchase, it increases the supply.
And it also knocks the incentives for private landlords.
Yeah, exactly.
Disincentivises
I mean, we
that.
need to euthanize right to buy landlords.
As your boy John Maynard Keynes once said.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, one argument against is that it will create more institutional landlords, but actually that's potentially a good thing
Probably
because
a
you
good
can
thing.
bargain with them.
It's good.
So rent controls work in Germany because they have institutional landlords, a bit more like housing associations.
Yeah.
The whole thing of decentralized, you have 1/10 of society who own 2 houses and then rent them out. It's completely
crazy.
irrational. It's an irrational way of organising society.
And you don't. Obviously, we don't care about this stuff, but you don't. The provision of services, it doesn't in any way resemble a functioning market. I've had 15 different landlords in 15 different years. Most of them were shit. The only good one was a guy who had 200 properties. You know why? Because it was like an actual business, and because he was operating at such scale. He had a handyman. If your washing machine went, you'd get a new one the next day. Now that's not an argument for people to own 200 properties, but he was treating it in a very different way to how many people treat it, which is like you say, ultra wealthy people. They have 1 or 2 extra properties, and in their defence, there's not many ways of finding a return right now in British capitalism. Interest rates are low. The rate of return from most businesses is very low. We have a rentier economy, so right to buy is the best thing to do. And, they just look at these flats as piggy banks. They certainly don't want to make sure they're up to spec, double glazing, clean, etc. It's not anything, it's not a competitive market. It's not a healthy market. We need to euthanize the rentier.
I want to go to questions kind of soon, but first of all, you said on Twitter today that you were going to talk about, let's read your tweets here. So you've got, Boris Johnson has done more to adapt and transform the Tories to a post-2008 politics in 1 week than Corbynism has in 3 years. If you aren't ruthless, you lose. What is more, Labour has now aligned itself with a political tendency which either pathologically hates socialism or B, has absolutely no political compass or understanding of post-crisis political economy. The Tories are either fracturing or transmuting. We probably won't know for a while. My bet is on the former, and that's been the case since 1992.
Yes.
Doesn't mean latter won't succeed temporarily.
Yes.
In any case, I'll be discussing this with Michael J.S. Walker on Novara Media, YouTube at 8 p.m. So
yes.
Here we are. Tell me what you meant. And actually, while you tell me what you meant, I will be listening, but I'll also be going to grab my laptop charger.
Go on. Hold that tweet in your mind. Basically, it was about, this is probably going to get clipped up, and this is when Aaron Bastani talks to himself, but Michael can still hear me, can't you, Michael?
I'm still listening.
He still hear me. So basically what I was saying is that Boris Johnson last week, it was kind of like shock doctrine politics for the Tory party. 21 people lost their whip. Obviously how that's interpreted by the lobby, by Westminster, by the commentariat is it's just bad. If you're Dominic Cummings, it means you can get 21 new MPs who do exactly what they're told. So it's a great opportunity for them. There was a clear out of the old guard to a far greater extent, kind of Remainy, moderate, Cameroonish style Tories. There was a far bigger clear out of them in the last week. Amber Rudd, Kenneth Clarke, there's quite a few of them. Sam Gyimah. You've got 5 or 6 of them. Who else? Older guy, Nick Soames, although he's not a moderate. I've got confusion with these categories. There was a bigger clear out of that tendency than anything you've seen with Labour over the last several years. And I do think that Dominic Cummings is showing a degree of ruthlessness that we've not really seen from the Labour left. And if there's a general election and Labour don't win, even if Labour are the biggest party, there'll be people within the Labour Party that try and then remove Jeremy Corbyn. There'll be if obviously Labour do very badly, there'll be a coup, obviously. And depending how badly, it would have more or less chance of winning. And the project will be over. And that is why we should have had mandatory selection. And the point is, I've seen recently articles blaming John Landsman, Momentum. No, they have wanted mandatory selection since day one. Mandatory selection was effectively scotched by the Leader's Office and by Unite, right? So it's not like some conspiracy to undermine Jeremy Corbyn. He and his team didn't want mandatory selection because they wanted to seek compromise. And if they don't win the next general election, that could mean that the project's completely finished. That's a worst case scenario. That's me sort of, being a Jeremiah lamenting what could be. I don't think it will happen, by the way. I'm relatively optimistic. But Dominic Cummings would never have done that. And so I think the last week shows the level and degree of ruthlessness we're looking at on the right, which is very much bereft on the left.
Max Shalley in the comments says the lack of ruthlessness will be the Corbyn project's downfall. So he's agreeing with you.
Completely agree.
My thought when reading that thread earlier was that, yes, I think there's definitely some truth to it. I'm obviously also in favour of mandatory reselection. But I do think that potentially Boris Johnson had an easier sort of opportunity than did Corbyn, because if you think about the support that Boris Johnson has in the Conservative Party, it's a lot, or in the Conservative, is it called it can't be called the CLP,
base. The
Parliamentary
associations.
Conservative Party.
The associations.
PCP.
No, the associations.
Well, what I mean anyway is the MPs, right? So in
Right.
terms of the support that Boris Johnson has on the Conservative benches is much deeper than what Jeremy Corbyn had on the Labour benches. So he can, if he it's caused him quite a lot of bother to kick out 20 odd MPs, but that's only led to solidarity actions by one or two Conservative MPs. Whereas I think if Jeremy Corbyn had done that to 20 MPs 3 years ago, potentially you could have got 100 walk out. Because the amount of support he has on the benches is so much smaller.
Good.
Then he would no longer have been the leader of the opposition.
Then we won't have to deselect them. Good.
I mean,
That's what Cummings would say. I mean, there's clearly a sweet spot, right, where you say 100's a lot. I actually don't think it would be 100, right? Actually, leaving the Labour Party, they would have just started a new party.
well, they would have started a new party.
Yeah. So let's say 50 or 60 leaving.
We would have kept the brand.
Yeah, and they would have been screwed.
We would have kept the brand
They
and the
didn't do
members.
that for a reason. And it's a weird thing to say, but people are obviously, I despise the guy, but Rory Stewart is far more principled than somebody like Tom Watson. He is, clearly.
Well, actually, one thing with Conservatives is they're richer.
Yeah.
So because they're kind of there as a hobby, whereas Labour MPs are either there as representatives of the movement or there as a career.
Yeah.
Whereas Conservative MPs are often there as a sort of like little hobby horse.
Yeah.
Because they come from a background of huge amounts of money and they can easily walk into the financial sector if they leave.
Or MI5, whatever.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
Or he just do a little BBC series. That's what he does, just sort of floating around the British institutions. Tom Watson, what's he going to do? He wants to be on television. If he's not a politician, how's he going to do that? He might go on Dave Asprey, Bulletproof Radio, might do a podcast or something, but other than that, he's not really got much to talk about.
In any case, what I'm hoping is that... Oh, actually, when was that meeting going to be? Anyway, on last Friday's show, and we were talking about trigger ballots, we pointed to a Squawk Box story, actually, that said that the NEC were potentially going to decide, in the case of a snap election, not to endorse a bunch of the worst offender MPs. So what I'm hoping is that they take inspiration from Dominic Cummings and get rid of about 20. I think if they keep it less than what the Conservative parties did, they can always go like, yeah, we did 20, they did 21. Why aren't you asking them about it?
Top five.
My top five.
There's been a lot of actual natural kind of,
Yeah, most of the worst have walked out, but I mean, there's still... Oh, because John Mann went on the weekend as well. That was good news. Graham Jones, Neil Coyle, Wes Streeting.
Oh, friend of the show.
Yeah.
Hey, it was only 6 months ago that we had a beer with Wes Streeting over the road, and now you're saying he should go.
No, he'd be welcome on the show even once he's kicked out.
Hey, we can make him a runner for Novara
Yeah,
Media.
no, I think he's a...
He could.
he'd make a fine political commentator.
He could clip up the best of Michael Walker of Tisky Sour Shareables.
Yeah, I'm sure he
We
would
need somebody
understand if I
to
said
move
that
some of
too.
the boxes around the studio. Maybe he could do that.
I'm
just
kidding.
I'm
not going to list a whole 10.
I'm just kidding, but I'm actually surprised you said that. I am surprised you said that because he's one of the sort of awkward squad who would make life difficult. Whereas somebody like I haven't said that, by the way. Michael has said that. I generally believe that CLP should deselect generally.
Well, I think what this has shown though is that even
people like Graham Jones. I mean, there's really nobody cares.
Yeah.
Oh,
and that homophobic guy from Birmingham.
Oh, what's his name?
I don't know. That's
There's
the
so
thing.
many
We
of
don't
them.
know their names.
There was a lady,
we don't know who any of them are.
a Welsh MP today. She was tweeting Labour MP, and I was like, "Who's this?" Clyde? I've never heard of her. And as Labour's like, "How many of them are there? We've only got how many? 260 MPs, 250 MPs."
I think it's 235 or 245.
Oh, because we've lost people like Jared Amara and so on, right?
We'll look it up.
It
I
was
don't like it when you ask me
250-ish.
numbers.
And I mean, how many MPs are there? That I don't know. They're like the in the AI in the Matrix when it takes on the body of that person. What agent, whatever it's called, somebody can say in the comments.
And they all look the same, yeah?
They all look the same. That's basically half the Parliamentary Labour Party.
Okay.
But top
Let's
five.
take- let's-
Go on, top five. You
my
only gave me
top
three.
five.
You only gave me three.
Well, no, because they're all the people I haven't heard of. That's the point. Oh, what I was going to say, actually, is that my theory whereby you get the ones that no one has heard of because they can cause less damage afterwards. To be honest, I think what like Amber Rudd leaving has shown is that no one cares, even if they're famous. I mean, potentially, it might be a signal to some sort of like liberal Tories that the tent has got smaller. But, I mean, did you see her on Andrew Marr? We can't do another Andrew Marr clip because it's like...
Well, it got 1.2 million views, so obviously it
Well,
was a good
her
show.
interview, it was the shittest resignation interview I'd ever seen. Because it's like, if you're going to resign, you need to say like, look, his leadership is a disaster. This is terrible. I resigned for a reason. It was serious. What she said was like, look, I support Boris in negotiations. I'm still a member of the Conservative Party. And she said, my problem was that the proportion of time going into negotiating no deal was much bigger than the proportion of time going into negotiating a deal. You know, the proportion of time going into preparing for no deal.
We're not preparing properly.
And then she was sort of saying, no, she was saying we are preparing properly, but the proportion is all wrong.
We're not even. We're pretending to prepare properly rather than actually negotiating a deal.
Why it was actually a propaganda coup for Boris Johnson, because she was saying there's so much energy going into preparing for a no deal, but only 10% of the energy is going into negotiating a new deal. And to be honest, I was I'm not a hard Brexiteer, and I was watching that thinking like, to be honest, it's probably harder to prepare for no deal than to prepare for some fake negotiation.
It's also not true. Like the Cork, for instance, in Ireland, they're making changes to their ports, which we're not doing anything like that. Yeah, it's true. So like, it's just also, it's not true.
She said, we are the party of moderation and the party of proportion.
No, you're not.
I was like, what do you mean the party of proportion? It doesn't make any sense.
It's been like a run on the fucking pound. Like, we've got a Prime Minister who wants to prorogue Parliament, and it's not new. You know, the lady you served under, Theresa May, only had one Queen's speech. She didn't ever really have a majority. We would have had another general election after 2017. We didn't, and the whole media put a mask over it because it would have meant Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister. 2010, 2011, we only have one Queen's speech. So this gradual suspension of formal democracy has been coming for a while, and she's been a part of it. Windrush, hello. How moderate is that? You know? So, I mean, it's the same with these 21 people that were lost the whip. You know, I've heard them, it's been sort of background music. They're on radio for, I'm still a member of the Conservative Party. I haven't been deselected. I still support their agenda for government. You've just been shat on from 10,000 feet and you're still gleefully smiling and looking into the camera. What has to happen for you to say this guy is bad news as the Prime Minister? What has to happen? What has to happen? Does he have to put an apple in your mouth and, put you over a spit and start to barbecue you? What has to happen? What does he have to do? He's publicly humiliated you. He's destroyed your career. Like, what has to happen? If anybody can put it in the comment. If Amber Rudd, if you're watching, put it in the comment. It's crazy. It's crazy. Imagine that if I said to Jess Phillips, I don't like your top today, that'd be cool for me to be expelled from the Labour Party.
That's so true.
Unbelievable.
I love the Dominic Cummings line, actually. I mean, obviously he's a complete asshole, but of him sort of when the rebels, the Gawkward Squad or whatever they're called,
really
went in to have a discussion with Boris Johnson about how much negotiations he'd been doing, when Dominic Cummings said to them, like, I don't know who you are, which I thought was quite a good line.
Totally true.
That's what we need Seamus Milne to... Actually, I can imagine Seamus Milne doing that as well.
But he would actually mean it. Yeah. Dominic Cummings is like kind of like trying to be a bully. Seamus like, honestly, I was up till 2 a.m. with Tariq Ali talking about, the workers' movement in South Korea in the 1980s. I've no idea who you are. Sorry.
All right, give me some of your questions, people. Clave Sounds asks, Aaron, do your 5 names to deselect.
I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, right? And I think I agree with what you said last week. I do think you could literally deselect. You could get rid of 50. You could get rid of people like Tom Watson, Jess Phillips. I actually don't think the overhead would be that bad. You think it would be? I don't think it would be. But 5 people I deselect. Margaret Hodge.
That would be risky.
I just think the way she's behaved is contemptible. Just from a rules point of view, you can't treat colleagues like that. In any business. Actually, in most businesses, she would have been chucked out. Margaret Hodge. Who else? All the bad people have left. Then like Graham Jones, Darren Jones. Graham Jones because of the Saudi Arabia connection. Darren Jones. Ben Bradshaw because he said I shouldn't be on BBC Any Questions. There's this real authoritarian streak that goes through so many of them. But realistically, I think you're right. 15 to 20. I've given you 4 there.
I don't know if you know. This is like a quiz question as opposed to a sort of like analysis question. I don't know the answer. Sid D, has a PM ever been arrested, or is this testing the reach of the law? Has there ever been a PM who was arrested?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, there have been prime ministers that have broken the law. That's for sure.
Well, this is an interesting question. Max Shanley, who do you think currently outside of Parliament should be Labour candidates in safe seats for the next election?
So we have like a list and we put people into safe seats?
Yeah, an A list.
For me, and she won't let me say this, Grace Blakely.
Yep.
She's a top economist. She's young, woman. Although that said, after the next election, Labour will have over 50% women MPs, so that's less of an issue. She's a top person. But Basingstoke's quite, it's not a massive Tory majority. Get Grace in there, but it's not a safe seat. But she's from Basingstoke. So for me, Grace, I think you'd probably want a couple of really strong people in Scotland to help revivify the party up there. You probably want more people like Laura Pidcock in the north, really young working class people up there. So it doesn't necessarily have to be celebrities, but you're looking for a certain kind of personality type, a certain person that embodies certain characteristics. So if you could clone Laura Pidcock, a couple of her, Paul Sweeney, a couple of people like him. We don't necessarily agree on the EU, etc. But he's got.
You want Laurie McFarlane in Scotland? Friend of the show. He's been on a recent
I think
Tisky
he's a Labour
Sour.
Party member.
He is now.
Oh, is he?
I think so.
No. He's an indie person, isn't he?
Yeah, lots of the indie people moved over to the Labour Party.
Yeah, so if it was me, I'd say people like Laurie McFarlane, Cat Boyd, but then they're all like indie people. It would just look like a...
No, but loads of indie people moved to the Labour Party.
And also, here's the thing. There was a poll on Scottish independence, I think, over the weekend, and it was 51 to stay in the UK, 49 to leave. And they do need to get Devo Max before they leave. And I think that's where people who want independence now need to move. Be part of Labour, go for Devo Max, radical federalism, constitutional transformation. So yeah, a couple of those guys, a couple of people in the north, Grace Blakely. You probably want like a foreign affairs person, foreign policy sort of expert. Like David Waring or something.
Yeah, that's who I was thinking of.
You're thinking of
Yeah.
only people who've done
Only
videos
people
for
who
Novara
come on
Media.
my show are allowed to be MPs in the next round of selections.
Maybe who was piping up today? And I was going to say give them a safe seat, but it was a joke, so ignore me.
Gary McQuiggan asks, how do we win back Scotland?
Yanis Varoufakis, that would be interesting. How do we win back Scotland? Constitutional offer. And there's been a base economism that's characterised Labour anti-austerity. Doesn't work because the SNP can pass themselves off as exactly the same thing without the baggage of being in government before 2010. Yeah. So you do the economic stuff, you offer radical socialism, you have to distinguish yourself from the SNP there, which they've tried to do, and it did pay off a little bit in the last election. They picked up seats. In addition to that, you add the constitutional reform stuff. You say, never again, and this is what the Scottish National Party do very well, never again can Scotland vote for a government and get an altogether different one and be bound by the electoral choices of other nations in the United Kingdom. So you give more powers to Holyrood. You have electoral reform, which makes a Tory majority increasingly unlikely. Reform the House of Lords, etc. So it's a localism, constitutional sort of agenda as well as an economic one.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think you've got to see it as a decade-long project. I think the idea of just being, they're fifth in the polls at this point. I think you have to see winning back Scotland, or even just having a presence in Scotland, as a long-term thing. I think when I see the Labour Party just sort of like hating on the SNP, just seems a bit cheap. You're just scraping from a real position of weakness, where you're just sort of trying to say, well, independence won't solve all of Scotland's problems. Why don't you look at the economy? It's sort of like, I don't think that's, it looks like you're fighting for life, and you need to take a step back, say, what role can we play in sort of like the social, the social struggles going on in Scotland, and how can we rebuild from there, instead of like be just from this incredibly defensive position of attacking anyone who's in favour of independence, because I don't think that's how you're going to win back any support up there. I mean, to be honest, neither of us are experts on this, but I suppose
the thing is as well, there's lots of bad arguments that are made against the SNP. So even Wales, right? Somebody just put like a independence for Wales there in the comments, and I've heard a counter argument that says Wales is too small to be independent. There's like 6 or 7 member states of the European Union which have a smaller population than Wales. I think Wales' population 3 million, 2.5 million, 3 million. Lithuania's smaller, Latvia's smaller, Estonia's smaller, Montenegro's smaller, Slovenia's smaller, Luxembourg's smaller. So that's just not true. And what the SNP have in their favour is, in that part of the world, small nation states do really well. You've got Ireland next to you, higher GDP per capita than Britain. You've got Sweden, you've got Norway, you've got Denmark, you've got Finland. You've got Iceland, only 400,000 people. It's not going to work. If you say, you're too small to govern yourselves and be an affluent country, they're literally surrounded by countries who exhibit precisely those features. That argument isn't going to work. So, I think a lot of the arguments used against the SNP as rebuttal are lazy, and people see through them, whether or not they want independence.
Gary's just WhatsApped me saying, ask the second question. He's full of questions today. What are the Brexit Party going to do now? Should we be worried, seeing as their campaign for the EU elections was so good? It's an interesting point. I mean, I think what you're likely to see is them keep their powder dry. I really don't think they're going to go that hard against the Conservatives in this general election, because I think that Nigel Farage is going to recognise that he has a lot more influence over the next few years if Boris Johnson is Prime Minister. What you might see is a sort of informal deal where the Brexit Party go hard for a few Labour Leave seats in the idea that then they would be able to, ally with the Conservatives and form a sort of informal coalition.
That'd be very wise. That'd be very wise. But then the thing is, do they trust the Conservatives to come good on that promise sufficiently?
Well, I mean, that's what everyone seems to be suggesting, and it seems like there is informal discussions going on between the Conservative Party and the Brexit Party. The potential there, though, is that I don't think you'd see the Conservative Party fully standing down in those seats, and potentially then what you do is you split the Leave vote, or you split the right-wing vote, and that could end up helping Labour, so it could backfire.
If I was the Brexit Party, I would only run in Labour seats. That's what I would do. I wouldn't even stand against Tories unless they were Remainers.
Well, that's the thing. They're going to stand against Tory Remainers.
Well, let's define a Remainer. But yeah, 9 times out of 10, you wouldn't be running against in Tory seats.
So far, they've only said they won't. What they've currently committed to doing is not running against people who voted against May's deal all 3 times. So as it currently stands,
that's not many people. That's like 50 people.
Yeah. So as it currently
Boris
stands,
Johnson
they're standing
voted for
everywhere else.
May's
Yeah,
deal.
exactly. But I reckon that could change as time goes on. Mikey Walsh,
Rees-Mogg voted for May's deal, didn't he? The 3rd time.
Yeah, he did.
So,
they probably won't stand against Rees-Mogg.
Doesn't mean very much. We're on 1580. Can we make it go higher? Hit the like button.
Yeah, but I want to just do 2 more questions because I want to keep these shows tight now that we're doing them more often. People don't have enough hours in the day.
That's true, because we want to come back every day. We want to come back tomorrow, etc.
So. Uda asked, will the Tories and the Brexit Party strike a deal? I think we just covered that. This is an interesting question. Joe Morris, is there any circumstance in which Corbyn would continue as leader if Labour loses a general election?
Of course he can. I mean, there's loads of circumstances.
There's loads of, I suppose.
Are there any? There's loads of circumstances.
There are loads of circumstances where he does. I think it would be quite difficult.
Depends. If they're the largest party but they don't have a majority, he clearly has an argument to stay.
Oh yeah, but we're not. That wouldn't count as losing a general election.
No, if they don't form the government, though.
There
might be a Brexit, Tory party coalition, etc. Right? I mean, God knows how it might play out, but so if they're the largest party, unlikely. I don't see how they could make major losses. But if they did, if they went below 200 seats, for instance, it's hard to see how he could stay. But the reality is, whoever replaced him wouldn't do him any better. If we'd taken a hit to the Lib Dems on Remain and the Brexit Party on hard Brexit, that's a political issue. Just like Ed Miliband can't be blamed for losing Scotland in 2015. That was a long time coming for Labour. That was a structural problem for Labour. And what Labour have now done by adopting the position they have on Brexit, which I actually happen to agree with, is that they have tied themselves to a political coalition which includes people who hate socialism. A lot of kind of soft Lib Dem voters. They hate socialism. So it's a risky strategy.
Oh, you're talking about the voters now. This is kind of going back to what your Fred was about.
But I mean, but an upshot of that strategy, maybe they get less than 200 seats, which I don't think would happen. But in which case, yes, Jeremy Corbyn probably would have to leave.
I suppose this is related. SGB, did the Labour left have a plan post-Corbyn? I suppose, for one, we shouldn't really be talking about post-Corbyn. We're about to enter a general election where he's going to become the Prime Minister. But I suppose you also do need a plan B.
And also, it's important to maintain expectations.
Yeah.
The reason why 2017 felt like a win was because we thought we were about to get smashed. If we walk into the next general election and go, we're definitely going to form a majority, you're sort of setting yourself up for failure. So I think it's worthwhile being sceptical about these things. In terms of who comes after, people talk about having to be a woman. I don't think that's necessarily true. We've never had a BAME leader, for instance. Even if it was a working class white guy, that would still be a break with all the leaders of the last 40 years. However, I'm inclined for a woman candidate. I don't think it would have to be. I don't think it should be an AW from the left. I don't think it should be an AWS necessarily, or informally that might be what happens. So women from the left, you're looking at Laura Pidcock. Who else?
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
I would take Laura Pidcock.
John McDonnell.
Every day of the week. Exactly. John McDonnell.
I'd take John McDonnell, to be honest. If it was very soon, John McDonnell.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. As the continuity candidate. Sort of continuity Corbynism. But in the longer term, Laura Pidcock. I like Clive Lewis. He's, mixed heritage. We've never had that before. But again, it's too young. I mean, one of the great things about Corbyn is that, he's been on the scene a long while. You know who he is. You know what he stands for. Why did Cameron make that decision that he did with the hubris that he did? Because he was still a young man. Maybe it's not a bad thing to have older political leaders. Look at Bernie in the US. Same dynamic there. But one of the things about mandatory selection set time after time, we would have more politicians like AOC. And there would be many, many successes to potentially look at from the left.
People saying, what the fuck is AWS? All women shortlist. It happens in some CLPs. Aaron's saying it shouldn't happen for the leadership, even if it would be ideal that the next leader were a woman. Should we leave it there?
Let's leave it there. Are we talking about defeat? How depressing? We're not talking about defeat. We're talking about expectations management. This is very important over the next 2 months. People have to understand this. If people are trying to say, my view is Labour will be the biggest party, won't form a majority. We don't want to oversell what's going to happen here, right? And that's why 2017 felt like a win. Because I think we could form majority government. But we need to be realistic at the start of this thing, going into a general election, which I think would be called on October 21st, which would mean a late November election. And then we take it from there. Because if we set expectations far higher than where they plausibly could be, we set ourselves up for a fall, and Corbynism, because the knives will come straight out if we don't form majority government, having set it for a month in advance.
Realistic expectations, but reach for the stars, eh?
Absolutely.
We'll be back tomorrow. Potentially, we're going to start slightly later tomorrow because it's with Grace Blakely. We're doing the interview about her new book, Stolen. It's a brilliant book. There's actually been some people in the comments sort of saying what should be our lines on the economy going into the next general election, and I am certain that Grace Blakely is going to come with a few of those tomorrow, so it is something not to be missed. For the exact start time, check out our Twitter. It'll either be 8 or 8:30. So see you then. Not same time, but the same place tomorrow.